to lead this towards the books that you two are writing and the tentative titles. Let me just say that for Tiff, the book that you're almost completed with is The Biology of Transformation. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then also for Paul, Restoring Science as a Spiritual Path. These are powerful titles, and I would really love to dive into, and either one of you could start, but when you're talking about transformation, that's larger. There's a biological correlate to it, but I know you mean more than that when we're talking about transformation. And then Restoring Science as a Spiritual Path reminds me of a Rudolf Steiner book called Thinking, or Intuitive Thinking as a Spiritual Path. That's right. And I just love that. So I would love for you to take that away. Either one of you could start.
You want me to go? You go.
Fine. Okay, I'll start. So yeah, this book that I've been working on, and if things go well, it'll be done within a year and available. It essentially gets to this question, and there's so many institutions these days that exist to help heal the divide between, religion and science, and spirituality and science. What exactly does that mean? What is this divide, and how did it happen? And the way this book is trying to address that is, first of all, it's a kind of fictitious divide that should never have happened to the degree that it exists. And so I've basically been interviewing a lot of scientists about their scientific work in the relationship of their own spiritual transformations. And the purpose of the book will be to let people know that actually what's often characterized out there is this great divide between scientists and spirituality, and that all scientists are materialists and they deny everything and anything beyond the material form. That's, of course, not true at all. So I've been interviewing, and the scientists are very candidly providing to me their deepest transformative experiences. For many of them, it was spiritual experiences when they were young that opened up the world to them beyond the physical, that led them to become a scientist, because they thought to themselves, wow, what just happened? Yeah. What did I just see and experience? What is this other world beyond my typical five senses? How do I learn about it? Sure, some would start reading spiritual religious books, but many decided that the most systematic approach to knowledge is science. So they became scientists to study. And then there are other scientists I've interviewed who they were more materialists, and they were into science because they just liked it, and they're very intellectual people. And somewhere along the road, they had a spiritual transformation. And then we're going to document, well, how did that change their scientific work? And ultimately, how is all that work helping to transform how science is practiced today? What kind of scientific work is being done for the benefit of ourselves and society? And also, how's the education of scientists beginning to change so that young scientists don't have to feel so inhibited to keep that part of themselves in the closet, which is common.
Yeah.
As a professor at UC San Diego for about 30 years, I would have many young students come to my office, knock on the door, excuse me, Professor Mills, can we chat? I hear you're kind of spiritual, and I've got some things I need to speak about. And so I would speak with them and try to encourage them. Don't hide that part of yourself. Let it come forth, because that's the seed of your creativity, your wisdom. It'll guide you, faithfully guide you onto the next steps for your own scientific work and your own further transformation. That's it in a nutshell.
I love it. I think this perfectly segues into human sovereignty. I know that you mentioned we wanted to talk about this, and I love that. So when you mentioned to that student, don't hide that part of yourself, what I love about that is because it's like, if you feel it calling forth, or if you feel it within, like, invite it forth to speak, give it its room to speak, rather than, a systematic approach to that would be like, which could be good, depending on how it's done, but getting people who may not feel it to try and understand it and to try and feel it. But when somebody comes to you and says, I'm experiencing this kind of conflict, I'm in a science class, but I have this other side of me, and then inviting that out a little bit more. a part of that is like you said, faithfully guiding you, knowing that this is faithfully guiding you. There's an aspect of trust that I really want to get at here, because I hear a lot of like, who are the trusted sources and what should we trust in the world today? And I always find that steps over the first question, which is, how much do we trust our own discernment? And what are we discerning? Like, is this my intuition? Is this partly my fear? And I think it's still good to engage and almost like seek the intuition as if it's in there, and like, what's the language of it? But with that being said, human sovereignty, what about that specifically? And maybe explain it, but what lately is causing for you to think that is a topic that would be, relevant here today, like human sovereignty?
Okay, I'll do my best to begin, and then I'm going to pass it on to Tiff.
Yeah.
And so I think partly what you said frames this really well these days, because so many people around the planet are being faced with very vital decisions. Should they do this? Should they do that? Should they follow this mainstream message? Should they follow another message? We're all trained and socialized to look for all the answers outside of ourselves. That's how our educational system works. That's how we're socialized. And it's really a pity, frankly, because we have all the answers within us. We just have to know how to get to them. And when we use the term human sovereignty, that's what I'm referring to, is the capacity for a human being to know without a doubt what is best for them. Do they go left? Do they go right? Do they do this? Do they do that? Do they proceed? Do they not? That kind of knowledge, that kind of guidance, we could say, from our higher spiritual minds, we could say, higher spiritual selves, is always available to us. We just need to listen, learn to listen, cultivate that, and then follow it. And Tiff has a very well-developed sense of sovereignty and innate knowing. And Tiff, it'd be nice if you spoke about gnosis and knowing with a G, as you often speak about in some of the courses. But it's when a human being operates from within their own self as a sovereign being. And sovereignty is a God-given right. And we should all be helping each other come into that. So, Tiff.
Yeah, there's so many topics.
Because you often say, I know what I know. There's no way anybody could talk me out of it.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to weave in here that it wasn't always that way for me. I was born clairvoyant, clairaudient, clairsentient, claircognizant, all of the clairs, clair overwhelming, I call it. And I willed it away, and I didn't want it all. And then later on, I had adult onset OCD, and it was because I was trying to corral it, and the trauma and everything just needed to be come up and healed. And so I didn't know which way to go. I didn't trust right or left. And the information that was coming in, sometimes it was wrong. And what was intuition? What was ego? And the smarter we get, the smarter our ego gets. And it's part of our development. Mm-hmm. And it's not meant to. I actually have a tattoo on my foot that I got when I was seeking to get rid of or annihilate the ego. And it was a very painful tattoo on purpose. And it was meant to, sort of inform that about being, is it ego or is it self-love? And what I now understand is that it's not an either or, but it's about bringing the ego along. Mm-hmm. And not being afraid to make mistakes and to integrate these parts, not annihilate. Because if we think about it, for every subconscious aspect is going to fight like hell for its own dominion to have a rightful place in our life experience. And so if we go about anything by saying, I want to do away with that part, I want to get rid of this, this is sort of on our road to figuring out our sovereignty, on our road to figuring out our individuation. And it took a while for me to come around to say, I only trust myself now. I don't trust anything I hear. And it's like, it's got to go through my own digestion, my intuitive digestion. And by the way, that book that you also brought up about Steiner, this was a pivotal book for me, The Spiritual Path for Intuitive Thinking as a Spiritual Path. I was always arguing with myself, like, how come I don't have a guru? How come I don't have any guru that's alive? All these people have all these teachers that are alive. All my gurus are dead. Where's my live one? I never had it. I had mentors, but I didn't have a living guru. And when I read that book, it was like, permission to just trust thyself, to trust that inner knowing. And that is my inner guru. That deeper knowing, that connection, that vertical connection, I call it. And gnosis is in knowing with a G, not just knowing with a K. Mm-hmm. Carnal knowledge is temporary knowledge. And I love what Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj says about all knowledge is ignorance, really. And so what do you know that you know? What do you truly trust that you've embodied and experienced and come into your own domain of sovereignty with? And how do you become a great decision maker for yourself, even though it may include mistakes? And that's part of it, mistakes. There really are no mistakes. It's just experience. And so this is part of, for me, in we can get really highfalutin on the sovereignty conversation. And really what it comes down to is, what is the everyday practice? What choices are you making based on your what you know? What is your own gnosis? Your knowing with a G, where you really grok it. It's unquestionable. And the other thing I wanted to mention that I just made a note about when you were speaking about our relationship to the planet as well, not to diverge the conversation, but to add to it, I believe that one of the reasons that we're seeing so many methylation issues in humans is because we have been screwing with the methylation of the planet, how our waterways move, how we naturally have a respiratory system, and our systems of elimination have been hurt as an as above, so below kind of relationship. So speaking of that morphic field, also related to the planetary body that you were mentioning earlier, and then still keeping that sovereignty alive about the decisions that we are making in our everyday. What direction does it go down? Is it down the road of wisdom, or is it down the road of separation?
Make sure you all head over to benjosephstewart.com, become a member. You'll have access to the growing library of deeper dives where I talk about all the stuff that I really can't talk about on YouTube. Make sure you get involved in the Discord chat. That's where a lot of the conversation is happening, talking about new theories, being able to interweave into the greater conversation that is how we awaken infinity. That's our highest potential. And I just want to remind you, you are the most powerful technology ever known to creation. Wield it like an artist with a conscience.